So we're just under 40 days away from the start of the NFL season, and I really want to start ramping up videos on this channel for all my rankings and my predictions going into next year. We already did my first official power rankings for the 2024 season. I'll put a link in the description to that. Today we're going to be talking about my AFC playoff teams. We're going to do NFC playoff teams and then a bunch of rankings, of course, as well. We'll rank all the teams, we'll rank all the quarterbacks, everything. So if that stuff interests you, go ahead and subscribe because we're going to be really busy in the next couple weeks. And then, of course, full-blown throughout the entire NFL season. So let's get into my predictions for the AFC playoff teams. So starting off with my division, the AFC North, we have the Baltimore Ravens. They obviously won this division last year. They were the 1 seed in the AFC, and they were the betting favorite going into playoffs to win the Super Bowl. So I just have a tough time thinking the Ravens are not going to be able to recreate what they did in last year's regular season. They were one of the most dominant teams, and there were points where their defense was historically great. So I think they have player for player the best roster in the NFL right now. You have the reigning league MVP in Lamar Jackson, who honestly could have a much better statistical year this year than he had in his MVP last year, where he threw for like 24 touchdowns. I could easily see Lamar throwing for like 35, maybe even 40 touchdowns this year. And you added Derrick Henry, a superstar running back. Lamar Jackson has never had anything like that. He's had good backs like Mark Ingram, and Gus Edwards in spurts last year was really good, but Derrick Henry is on a whole nother level. I think he just unlocks a whole new element to this Baltimore Ravens offense that is unseen. I think there's a chance Lamar and Derrick Henry are the best duo in the NFL this year, and they're probably going to be the most unstoppable red zone offense in the league between the pairing of Lamar and Derrick Henry. And we didn't even talk about their defense, which in spurts last year was historically great. You know, you got Matabuke, you just paid him. Makes a lot of sense. The guy had like 13 sacks last year. You have Roquan Smith, who you could argue is the best linebacker in football right now. And you have an elite secondary with Kyle Hamilton and Marlon Humphrey and a phenomenal coaching staff. So I think the Ravens are absolutely loaded, and I would pick them to win the Super Bowl. It's hard for me to go against the Chiefs right now because every time I've picked against the Kansas City Chiefs, they've made me look like a moron. So this would be my Super Bowl pick if it wasn't for that team in Kansas City. But that's how highly I think of the Ravens. This is by far the best roster they've had in the Lamar Jackson era, and I think they're poised to be one of, if not the most dominant teams in this year's regular season. Even though the AFC North has a lot of good teams, it's probably the best division in football. You know, every single team in the AFC North last year finished with an above 500 record. I just think the Ravens, from a roster standpoint, they're head and shoulders better than every other team in this division. For the AFC East, I'm picking the Buffalo Bills to win this division for the 5th straight season. I said this throughout last year, and I'm going to continue to say it this season. I'm not picking against the Bills in the AFC East until I see a team knock them off, because they have dominated this division for half a decade now, and I have to see it to believe it, to think any of these other teams are going to step up and knock the Bills down. Even though they've downgraded their roster, their secondary got gutted. Obviously, Stephon Diggs is gone now. They have kind of a questionable receiver core. Josh Allen is the modern-day Superman. That guy is a generational level talent. Anytime you have a guy like that on your team, I think your basement is a 10-win team. And they've shown the resiliency. Last year they were 6-6, and then they won out and won the division. And I get it. There are intriguing teams in this division, with Miami being a high-powered offense, being really good in the regular season. The Jets, even though I think the Jets are supremely overrated, they have a great defense, you know, a top 5 defense in the NFL, so they're going to be at least interesting. But like I said, I have to see it to believe it before I can pick another team in this division. The Bills have just been so dominant, and they have Josh Allen, who's a guy to definitely watch for the MVP race this year. And for the AFC South, I'm picking the Houston Texans to win this division. They were a 10-win team last year, and I think that they severely upgraded this team in the offseason. They had one of the best offseasons in the entire NFL, getting superstar players on both sides of the ball with Stephon Diggs and Danielle Hunter. And you look at this offense, spearheaded by C.J. Stroud coming off the best rookie season in the history of the NFL. He's going to be a year better. You have 3 legit weapons at the receiver position, and you got a Pro Bowl running back in Joe Mixon, an ascending offensive line, a really good offensive coordinator in Bobby Slowick, who I actually thought was going to be a head coach going into 2024. They were able to keep him. And defensively, we just said they added Danielle Hunter, a guy who had 16.5 sacks last year, to go with the Defensive Rookie of the Year, Will Anderson Jr. They also got Derek Stingley Jr., one of the best young secondary players in the NFL. So this team, to me, even though there are some really good teams in the AFC South, with the Colts, I think they're going to be really interesting. With Jacksonville is going to be really interesting. And the Titans could honestly even be pretty feisty. The Titans had some really good signings in free agency. But I just think Houston is head and shoulders better than all those teams. And I think the Texans are one of those few teams in the Super Bowl bubble right now where I don't even look at them as competing for the division. They should automatically do that. They're one of the teams I'm looking at to compete for the Lombardi. They're a team that really reminds me of that young 2013 Seattle Seahawks. Not in terms of having like the dominant Legion Boom defense, but in terms of being a young team that has a really good young quarterback who's on his rookie contract and just surrounding that guy with a ton of talent, with superstar players all around him. And that's what they did this offseason, bringing in Joe Mixon, bringing in Stephon Diggs, and grabbing one of the best pass rushers in the league with Danielle Hunter. So I think this roster is loaded. They have one of the best QBs in the NFL. They should easily win this division. And for the AFC West, I'm picking the back-to-back Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. Every time I've picked against the Chiefs, they've made me look like a complete moron. Back in 2022, after they lost Tyreek Hill and the Honey Badger, I was like, I just think this team is going to take a step back. That's why I picked the Chargers to win the division that year. I thought they had the better overall roster. And what happened? The Chiefs won the Super Bowl. And last year, 2023, I was like, you just cannot win a Super Bowl with this receiving core. It's too bad. The guys have feet for hands. Travis Kelce looks washed. Then the playoffs come around, he fucking flips a switch, and he's back to prime Travis Kelce, and they win another Super Bowl. So I think I'd be just a complete moron to pick against this team. I think anyone would be a complete moron to not pick the Chiefs to win this division. And the division outside of them just simply isn't that good. Like the Chargers, I know they brought in Harbaugh, but they definitely downgraded their team, losing those receivers. The Raiders are stuck in mediocrity, and the Broncos, I think they're a dumpster fire. I think they might be the worst team, not the worst, but bottom 5 team in the NFL this next year. I think the Broncos are a hot mess. So on top of being the back-to-back champs, also the other teams in the division I just don't think are that good. So I think this is a layup. It's the easiest pick of the entire video. For my first wildcard team, I have the Cincinnati Bengals. So if you watched my power rankings video yesterday, you saw I do have the Bengals in my top 10 teams going into this year. I do have my concerns with this team. This is not a flawless team by any stretch of the imagination. They do have a couple red flags for me. Number 1 being Joe Burrow's health concerns. Number 2 being all the weird stuff that's gone on organizationally with this team in terms of T. Higgins requesting a trade, in terms of Trey Hendrickson requesting a trade. And on top of that, it's just not simply the same team it was when they got to the Super Bowl. You know, they've lost key guys like Jesse Bates, like Joe Mixon. So that all kind of worries me. But the history of Joe Burrow's career tells us, you know, he's played 4 seasons. In 2 out of those 4 years, they made extremely deep playoff runs. In 2021, they got to the Super Bowl. 2022, they got to the AFC title game. So history tells us as long as Joe Burrow plays a full season, which I know is a big if, but if he does play a full season, this team should be a playoff lock despite their departures, and they could potentially have a vastly improved offensive line. I feel like I've been saying this for like 2 years now because they have. I will give the Bengals credit on this. It might not have worked out, but they have invested in their O-line. They have tried to bring in guys to patch up this O-line, and I feel like they even did that again this offseason, bringing in Trent Brown from New England and also drafting Amarius Mims. I know didn't have a lot of playing time at Georgia, but in the stretch we saw, looked like an absolute monster. So you finally get the O-line right. You get Burrow upright playing. I think him and Chase are one of the most lethal combinations in the NFL. And history tells us if he plays, they're going to be a really good team. And for the second wild card spot in the AFC, I have my Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, hold on. Before you shoot down to the comments section and call me a biased Yinzer, at least hear me out what I have to say about the Steelers. You look at the team last year was kind of a disaster, held together by Band-Aids and bubblegum. and yet they somehow managed to win 10 games, despite the quarterback situation being an utter disaster between Pickett, Trubisky, and Rudolph. Those guys combined for like 16 touchdowns altogether. Now you bring in Russell Wilson, who I get it. He's not what he once was, but last year he threw for 26 touchdowns, and I think he's going to be in a much better offensive environment in Pittsburgh. So I think there's a real chance Russ has a far better statistical year this year than he had in Denver. I could see Russ easily throwing for 30 touchdowns. The way that this offense is orchestrated, we've invested a lot of high-end draft capital in trying to rebuild our offensive line. Over the past 2 drafts, we've invested 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick in our O-line. We have a great running back tandem. We have an emerging superstar receiver, George Pickens. And on top of that, I think the defense has potential to be top 5 in the NFL. When you look at, there's a true playmaker superstar in each unit of our defense now, with TJ Watt being the best defensive player on the planet. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. Like, you look at his sack totals over the past 5 years, it's really only in Lawrence Taylor category. Patrick Queen now coming over from the Ravens. I don't know if he's quite a superstar yet, but he's definitely shown glimpses of being a breakout player. I think he's a difference maker. And then, of course, Minkah Fitzpatrick comes back off injury. Well-rounded by a bunch of other really good players on the defense, like Cam Hayward, like Alex Highsmith, like Joey Porter Jr. And to top it all off, you have one of the most stable coaches in the NFL running this whole thing in Mike Tomlin. It's hard for me to look at all the mess that happened last year with the Steelers, and they won 10 there. And now I just think it's a much better roster, and to think that they can at least get back to 10 wins. So for me, they are the second wildcard spot. So when I was making my list of these wildcard teams, I came to 8 teams. So I had to cut 5 teams. So I'll probably do a video about those teams that are just on the cusp. But the Chargers were that final spot that squeaked in. I think it really came down to them and the Dolphins. And I ultimately went with the Chargers for the fact that they now have Jim Harbaugh at the helm of this organization, who in the entire sport of football is one of the best culture setters in the sport right now. Whether it's college, whether it's the NFL, the guy has a proven track record of immediate success wherever he's gone. He's gone to dumpster fire organizations. He's gone to good blue blood organizations. It doesn't matter where he goes. He immediately changes the culture and has success. And you already see this team shifting towards a Harbaugh identity with some of the decisions he made this offseason, prioritizing the defensive and offensive lines, getting those right. And when you look back through Harbaugh's coaching tenure, never really had a player like Justin Herbert. You know, he had Andrew Luck for a little at Stanford, but Justin Herbert right now is, I think, easily in the top 5 conversation for quarterback in the NFL right now. So Harbaugh having that guy, him establishing his culture, him having that proven track record of success. It's hard for me to look at the Chargers, even though they did have some key departures, particularly with their receivers, with Austin Eckler and all that. It's hard for me to look at how Harbaugh's already stamped his MO on this team and think that they're not going to have success immediately. They still have a lot of talent on this roster. So that is all my playoff teams for the AFC. Like I said, I'll be doing, obviously, a version for the NFC, and I'll make a video about those teams that just barely missed the cut. So if you made it this far, really appreciate you listening. Go ahead and let me know your playoff teams down in the comments, and please like and subscribe.